sort of change up the format just a bit. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Still working on something in the background there, and get to. We have a conversation that we're going to have around 5 o'clock with a special guest, and I'm very excited about that conversation. This has been an interesting week in Bahamian politics, because when we get to one or two of the more fascinating stories, I think you'll understand. But I just want to say before we dive in that the country is in an interesting and almost things feel real right now in the Bahamas. There is a sense of unwillingness to take people at face value. There's a sense of unwillingness to accept that people are being honest, and frankly speaking, that sense is, I would say, to a large degree, justified, because integrity and personal integrity and honesty seem to have become less valued versus the need or the expediency, so to speak, of getting ahead in different ways. There's an old saying way back that politicians are creatures of expediency, which means that they will do what is necessary to advance their political agenda at the expense often of their personal feelings or their personal standards, or even in many cases their personal beliefs. And the deal that we make, the bargain that we as a community make with the politicians, who we expect to a degree to put their personal beliefs in their pocket while they are going about serving us, is that they will make decisions that they may not agree with, but they would make those decisions, quote unquote, for the greater good. But over the last few weeks and months, the tenor of public conversation, the tenor of the conversation that I have heard is that, Bahamians don't believe, by and large, that our politicians are truly concerned with the greater good. And I feel like that is a problem. That's a real problem, because it used to be that we believed as a community, as a society, that people go into politics in order to serve the public in some way, right? And for many people, politics is public service. But if you take a poll of people nowadays, it seems that our view as a society about why people enter politics has shifted almost entirely to the belief that many people hold that people go into politics to advance their own goals and their own agendas, whether that's aggrandizement or to increase their personal wealth or to make sure that their family gets a slice of the government procurement pie, or whether that is to push a radical social agenda, or whatever the reason might be. The sense that we seem to have arrived at is that the public good is no longer the primary concern or consideration for the people who are engaged in the political arena in our country, and that is a horrifying state of affairs in which to find oneself. That not that it's true, but that is our belief. And the reason that I find that horrifying is because belief leads to expectation. And people generally either live up to your expectations or they live down to your expectations. And if we continue to expect that our politicians are only in it for themselves, don't care about us, don't care about our children and our future, then there is almost a sort of a moral carte blanche that we give to the people in the political directorate to do what they want, and to do it with no recourse to us and no consideration of our needs and wishes and desires. Because after all, we don't think politicians care about us one way or the other, except as tools to get vote politics, to get access to the trough. And I have never believed that that is true of the majority of our politicians. I personally have always believed and continue to believe that the majority of people who go into politics in the Bahamas go into politics purely because they want to serve the public in some way. And they believe themselves capable and qualified to give that public service. And they believe that, to borrow from the Sundayness of it all, that they were born for such a time as this, and that for in many ways, God has called them to public service in this arena. So we really need to, as a community, examine our hearts as to what it is we believe about our politicians, about politics, and what those beliefs have led to in terms of our expectations. And then we must examine what those expectations, what pressure those expectations bring to bear on people who do politics. Because the truth continues to be that politics matters. There's a sense that people have that politics doesn't matter, that it is something separate and something that only happens during elections, or that it only happens at particular economic level, that it only affects people with money or whatever the case may be. But that is not true. Politics is so important because it's in the political arena that people make legislation and policy that governs what you as a Bahamian can and cannot do with the support of the law and the backing of the state. If, for instance, we continue to abandon our politics to whoever and let them do whatever they want, and we continue to call ourselves in our private conversations and in our churches and in our families, we continue to call ourselves a quote unquote Christian nation, but decision after decision after decision gets made in the political arena that changes and therefore affects what our culture accepts and what our culture defends as the citizen's right and responsibility. In short order, you can say we're a Christian nation all you want, but the reality is something entirely different. Because politics matters. And I have been hearing this laissez-faire sense from Bahamians in conversation that we've all just thrown up our hands and said, all right, well, we can't, they're not listening to us, so the hell with them. Just let them do what they want. And when they come to ask for my vote, that's when I can deal with them. But by then, it's too late. Decisions have been made. Choices have been made that affect you and the way you live your life. A member of parliament is supposed to be your representative in the room where the decisions are being made. You know, for all of my people who watched Hamilton, you know, one of my favorite songs from the Hamilton soundtrack is "The Room Where It Happens." Right? I want to be in the room where it happens. Right? And the line that sticks out, of course, is no one really knows how the sausage gets made, right? But if you have a person that you trust in the room where it happens, and you go to that person and you say, here is my view. That person's job as a member of parliament is to represent your view and the view of your fellow constituents when government decisions and policy are being made. And the fact is, you have abandoned, and I have abandoned, and I'm speaking in general terms, that we as Bahamians have abandoned our responsibility to influence government policy and to influence legislation. And we've left it to the politicians to think for us, to plan for us, to respond for us. But that isn't their job. Their job is to convey our thoughts. Their job is to convey our response. And if we continue to responsibility to influence our own political direction, our own national direction, we have nobody but ourselves to blame when our country shows up in a place that we had no intention of going. I hope I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. And I hope that you hear me and go do something. Oh, so that you don't end up like Hamilton, right? Complaining that no one else was in the room where it happened, right? No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, or how it's played. And you might end up just assuming that it's happened, but nobody else is in the room where it happens. Right? That's the song from Hamilton. I really love it, but I just want you to know that you have somebody in the room where it happens. And if you don't arm them with your views, they have no ammunition. All they could do is say, well, I think. And frankly speaking, one politician saying what they think is not power. I said this to someone who ran in the election in 2017, that politics is not about being smart. Politics is about representing a community. If you don't have a constituency, you have no power in politics. That's why they put Senate. But the people who get parked in the Senate are being groomed to run. Either they successfully ran before and they lost in a wave, or their party has belief that they could successfully mount a campaign in the next go round, or they lost their seat and the party doesn't want to lose their whatever. So they park them in the Senate until it's time to run again. Because the real power in our political system is the people. If you can get the people to keep electing you, that's where you get your power from. Look at Brave Davis. Look at Fred Mitchell. Look at Alfred Sayers. We're going to talk about Alfred today, right? But Alfred got re-elected. Obie Wolfscombe got re-elected. Look at Mike Pintard and Shannon Dawn Cartwright and those guys, right? The wave went with Brave. Mike Pintard, Hubert Minnis, Adrian White, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Ira Lewis, those five guys, held on to their seats. So I guarantee you, when the wheel turns again, those five fellas have power that the newbies won't have. Because in politics, power is people. Anyway, here endeth the reading. I didn't mean to go off on that long tangent. I apologize. But the week in politics was a spicy one, a very spicy one. So let's begin with the political review for February 5th, 2023. Firstly, in our political review, we have to start with this. Police Commissioner Clayton Fernander this week reported that the Royal Bahamas Police Force has launched an investigation after Davis received 2 death threats this week. Fernandez said 2 anonymous calls came into the office of the Prime Minister about 15 minutes apart, threatening to kill the nation's leader. He said the caller is believed to be male and that police are following significant leads with respect to that. And according to Fernandez, the police force is reviewing the Prime Minister's threat level and will put additional security measures in place. I found it interesting that Fernandez mentioned during the press conference that this was not the first time someone has threatened the prime minister's life. Uh, and I don't mean Brave Davis particularly, I mean the prime minister of the Bahamas. And um, so the thing now. And well, anyway, I look forward to seeing what comes of this. I hope that the police conduct this investigation in the sunshine, and that they are swift, and that justice is served. Next up in the political review, this one's going to be a little deep, right? Because the government continues to wrestle with the issue of gender and citizenship. While Attorney General Ryan Pinder had said in the Senate in June of 2022 that the government would advance legislation to allow Bahamian men and women to pass on citizenship in all circumstances by the end of last summer, he said this week that no bill would be brought before the Privy Council rules on whether the Constitution provides an automatic right to citizenship at birth to the children born out of wedlock to Bahamian fathers and foreign mothers. Up to the point of a landmark ruling by Supreme Court Justice Ian Winder in 2020, the constitutional interpretation had been that those children had no automatic right. The issue was taken to the Privy Council by Carl Bethel, who was the Attorney General in the Minnis administration. The matter is still live before the Privy Council. In fact, the Privy Council heard arguments on the issue on January 17th of this year. When he was asked about the government's promised citizenship bill, Ryan Pinder said that it's only appropriate to allow the High Court of the land to review something as important to the national interest as citizenship before the government is in a position to advance the legislative regime. So the issue went to the Privy Council after Bethel appealed Winder's ruling, and the Court of Appeal affirmed Winder's ruling in a 3-2 decision. And Bethel took the position that it had to go to the Privy Council in order for the matter to finally and comprehensively be addressed by the highest court in the Bahamas, or the highest court in our judicial system. And if we take in a 2016 referendum, voters rejected proposed changes to the Constitution that sought to address the ability of Bahamians to pass on their citizenship to children and spouses. A similar exercise was also rejected in 2002. And Bethel asked some complicated questions, simple but complicated, when he appealed the matter to the Privy Council. And basically, his question was this: which is to prevail? The acknowledged original intent of the founders of the Constitution, on the one hand, or do the contemporary concepts and norms prevail over the original intent, on the other hand? Of course, there was a change in government in September 21 before the appeal was concluded. And in March of 2022, Pinder confirmed as the new would continue the appeal. This week, he said that the government continues to develop citizenship legislative proposals for cabinet to consider, but he added that until a decision is made whether to alter the ruling or verify the ruling through legislation, the appeal would continue. And this is, in our view here at the Political Review, this is the problem with politicizing everything, right? Especially something as delicate and sensitive as citizenship rights and gender equality. Because, of course, speaking in the Senate in June of last year, Attorney General Pinder intimated that a citizenship bill was being finalized. He said at the time, and we quote, "We will advance by the end of the summer a piece of legislation regarding citizenship that in law will create equality between men and women when it comes to citizenship matters in this country. That is something that has been impossible to attain through referenda. We have the strength and the bravery to do it through and bring it to this honorable place, to bring the equality that the former FNM administration shied away from over and over and over again," unquote. And of course, it's up to the public to consider whether the inability to meet that deadline, bringing legislation by the end of the summer, carries political or reputational consequences. Of course, we have our own views here on the political review. But if the Privy Council upholds the decision of the lower court, what that would mean is that children born out of wedlock to Bahamian men and foreign women would no longer have to wait until they're 18 to apply for citizenship. It is not known how many people would be impacted by such a ruling, but it is understood that over the years, many such children have been granted citizenship after applying as adults. The government citizenship bill is expected to address other citizenship issues, including granting automatic citizenship to the children born abroad, to married Bahamian women and their foreign husbands. Whenever the bill is brought, assuming that it is likely to attract controversy, as such matters regarding citizenship very often do. The government would likely face criticism about trying to effect constitutional change through the back door, something it is already assured that it is not seeking to do. And let's look a little more at the context around this issue, right? Last April, former Attorney General Sean McQueenie, who chaired the Constitutional Review Commission, which reported in 2013, that he noted that the Constitution was never intended to exhaustively provide for all of the circumstances in which you could obtain Bahamian citizenship. What McQueenie said was that the Constitution dealt with certain special categories which were rooted in pre-existing entitlements, and that the framers of the Constitution wanted to make sure that those categories of persons were properly provided for. But he said there are a whole slew of other categories that were never intended to be provided for in the Constitution. We have always had a Nationality Act since we were an independent country in order to deal with the circumstances under which citizenship could be acquired, otherwise than by reference to the Constitution. And while the citizenship law would not change the Constitution, it would essentially have the same effect as constitutional reform, although any future administration could simply change by law. But what Pinder said last year, I think, is very true. And what he said was, and I'm going to quote him again, "I don't think there would be a future government who would change that law to impose inequalities of citizenship upon Bahamians. I mean, if they do, they should be voted out right away." Former Prime Minister Hubert Ingraham has also chimed in on this issue. And he said, I think it was late last year that he said this to The Guardian, that his government tried to permanently bring gender equality to citizenship in the Bahamas. That this attempt, which involved proposed constitutional changes, was the hard way of seeking to bring the change. Ingram said that he's confident that Prime Minister Philip Davis would take the easier way and just do it by legislation. Well, it doesn't, I mean, maybe it's easier, but it doesn't seem any less complicated. Next up in the political review, opposition leader Michael Pintard has given notice that he intends to call for the establishment of a parliamentary select committee to investigate the collapse of FTX, the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange that was based here in the Bahamas, and which is the subject of much scrutiny in jurisdictions around the world. In the House of Assembly this week, Pintard said that the inquiry would look at Bahamian legislation, policies, interaction with the company, government officials' interaction with the company and its officials in an official or. He said the inquiry would not cut across the judicial insolvency related to investigations ongoing in which the joint provisional liquidators who are court appointed will report to the court. The FNM, he said, supports that process taking its course. FTX, which relocated its headquarters to the Bahamas in 2021, as you all remember, collapsed in November of last year following allegations that customer funds were being inappropriately used. The company's U.S. and international entities filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the U.S., and the Bahamas-based entity of FTX was put into liquidation. Pintard said that the committee would investigate if the government invested any Bahamian resources into FTX at any level in any jurisdiction. The committee would also investigate the nature and extent of the government's due diligence, the impact of FTX's collapse on the Bahamas, the nature of politically exposed people and FTX, and other things. What Pintard said was that the call for the establishment of this select committee on FTX is to ensure transparency and public oversight in the matter, which is one of international concern. I'm going to quote Pintard here. He said, "Without a proper inquiry, the country would be left to endure a credibility problem and may be cast in a light of not sufficiently mature to be regarded by the international financial community as a responsible jurisdiction for this kind of economic activity." To be clear, Prime Minister Philip Davis has said that the Progressive Liberal Party received no money from FTX. Ooh, that's a very specific statement. But anyway. We're going to leave that alone for a while. So we'll come back to FTX next week as matters with respect to bankruptcy and the case against Sam Bankman-Fried are continuing in the U.S. and elsewhere. But meanwhile, our next story in the Political Review is the opposition, the official opposition, ramping up its assault on Works Minister and Fort Charlotte MP Alfred Sears, charging in the House of Assembly that Sears misled Parliament not once but 8 times on the Davis administration's failure to execute certain fuel hedge trades in the fall of 2021, which would have locked in fuel prices and kept Bahamas Power and Light Company's fuel charge stable. Pintard levied the accusations in the House of Assembly, which forced Sears to spring to his feet and declare that he never intentionally misled the House. Sears took exception to Pintard's use of describe the Davis administration's actions with respect to what Pintard termed a lack of transparency over the issue. The Speaker of the House ordered that particular word struck from the record of the Parliament, but Pintard fired back, saying that even if the particular word is not used, and note that we are not using it here on the Political Review, Pintard said, in English, it is called a synonym. It has the same meaning. Speaking to Sears, he said, "You have misled the House on no less than 8 occasions on your feet." Pintard told the Parliament, and I quote here, "We have not forgotten. The Prime Minister has not yet relieved the member of Fort Charlotte," that would be Sears, "of his duties, nor has he decided that he will demit office. But I remind the public that we are going to pay over $100 million because of ill-advised decisions by this administration." Unquote. The opposition leader has repeatedly charged not to execute the trades led directly to substantial increases in the fuel charge, which the Prime Minister announced in October would be put on bills incrementally. Pintard suggested it's difficult to trust the government's word going forward, given that it has failed to quote-unquote come clean on the BPL issue. He has repeatedly insisted that Sears resign over the matter for his conflicting statements in the House. For his part, Sears continues to object to the imputation of any deliberate attempt to mislead the House. But of course, Pintard has asserted that it's a matter of public record. He said that Sears, and he used the word confess, that he had received a briefing on the need to execute the trades, though he had previously told the Parliament he had not been briefed. Sears laid out the charge once, and Pintard laid out the charge again. Sears made the statement that he had not been briefed in the House of Assembly. Then he blamed us, saying that the Minister of Finance knew and made the decision. Sears has insisted, and I quote, that he at no time deliberately or consciously misled the House of Assembly. Pintard refused to back down and repeated that Sears had misled by indicating that he was not briefed on the need to execute the trades, and that he had said so at least 8 times in the House. Pintard added that most members of Parliament have seen the tape by now. The rest of the Guardian story on this issue addresses sort of the credibility of the Davis administration. And I guess we'll go through it. It says Pintard here talks about the administration only coming clean on major issues when they've been found out. They don't tell you. He said that the administration took out a loan from the central bank, which they called an advance, and only quote-unquote fessed up or made the public fully aware after the FNM raised the issue. I'm going to quote Pintard again. It is absolutely correct. $230 million they were given permission to draw down on, but never reported it. They didn't do so in the budget exercise. They did not do so in the Debt Management Committee report. They only did so after the FNM raised it and the media followed through. Earlier last month, the Ministry of Finance said that earlier comments by Pintard that the government is quote-unquote borrowing or printing money through accessing International Monetary Fund special drawing rights, or SDRs, obtained through the Central Bank of the Bahamas were misleading. The ministry said that the government was using the funding for its legitimate and intended purpose. Pintard has questioned the legal basis of the government's access to those special drawing rights. But the one issue that he's hammered on the government on most repeatedly has been the BPL hedge issue, particularly as Sears had made conflicting statements on the matter in the House over the course of weeks. After repeatedly saying that he had no knowledge of requests made by the BPL Fuel Hedge Committee for the trades to be executed, Sears acknowledged in December for the first time that he had in fact received emails making those requests. He said that after Pintard had continued to press the issue on November 17th, he had checked with Financial Secretary Simon Wilson, who provided a clarification on what had transpired. While Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Philip Davis also told Parliament he had seen nothing in relation to any request for hedge trades, Sears later told the House that a cabinet paper on hedging was addressed to the Minister of Finance, and that the Minister of Finance, again, that would be Prime Minister Philip Davis, decided to reject the recommendation after reviewing it. However, Davis has insisted that he had no part in the decision to reject the trade recommendation. How he had no part in that decision when the Minister of Finance decided to reject the recommendation, I'm not certain. And I think that we'll have to, I have a request for the Prime Minister to join us here on the Political Review. And I think that's a question that we should definitely put to him. Next in the Political Review is as protesters gathered outside the House of Assembly this week to demand that the government give more urgent attention to the country's immigration issues, Minister of Immigration Keith Bell called on Bahamians generally to let sanity prevail while we face these challenges. Scores of demonstrators chanted, "Brave got to go," in response to what they said is an immigration crisis. And in a communication to the House, Bell insisted this week again that the government is taking very serious action. The minister addressed what he dubbed the dangers of misinformation and untruths being spread via social media and other outlets. For instance, he asserted that protests based on an imaginary immigration bill were misguided, and that protests based on an imaginary shantytown on Paradise Island equally misguided. Minister Bell said, "Madam Speaker, there are no hidden deals. There are no surprises. There is no conspiracy. No member from this side, nor am I aware of any members opposite proposing and seeking to promote any policy which would erode the sovereignty or integrity of this country. This nonsense is being spread by persons who do not appear to be familiar with the truth, and it is just that, nonsense," unquote. In terms of the Department of Immigration, Bell reported that the department has taken a number of steps to safeguard the country in recent months. He said that no new work permit applications for Haitian citizens would be processed until such time were introduced to verify and authenticate documents issued by the Haitian government and the Haitian National Police. He said that new and existing permit to reside applications for Haitian citizens would only be considered on a case-by-case basis, and that approvals would only be granted in the most exceptional circumstances. The Department of Immigration has also committed to ramping up its special operations in the oncoming weeks to ensure that people in shanty towns have legal status. Bell announced last month that the department would crack down on work permit violators. And during his presentation in the House of Assembly this week, he said 4 Jamaican women were arrested for working illegally at a dancing club last month. And he said the raid on the club was part of a wider operation to crack down on foreigners working in the Bahamas without a work permit. He accepted the right of people to protest in reference to the demonstration outside the House. And he said that we're always open to listen. This is a quote from the minister now. "Indeed, at a previous protest, I received a proposal which was reviewed and considered. I would ask that everyone ensure that while we face these challenges, let sanity prevail. We are a country of laws, and the maintenance of law and order must remain a cornerstone of our country. Xenophobia has no place in the Bahamas, nor does the arbitrary harassment of any person on the basis of any perception as to their nationality. To those doing it, stop. Our immigration laws will be enforced," and I'm still quoting the minister here, "and violators will be returned to their home countries. If you are an illegal immigrant living on Harbor Island or Grand Bahama or wherever else in this Commonwealth, you must leave. You must immediately wind up your affairs and leave the Bahamas voluntarily. Failure to do so will lead to your arrest, prosecution, deportation, and placement on a restricted list. This applies to anyone in this country illegally, not just the Haitian migrants. Whether you're from the north, south, east, or west, if you have no lawful basis to be in this country, you must leave. Finally, this week in the Political Review, before we get to our Under the Radar section and our top story and our interview, I really was pleased to see this story because it is a follow-up development on something that we had here on the Political Review with Police Commissioner Clayton Fernander just after he was reappointed as commissioner recently, middle of last year or so. The Royal Bahamas Police Force officially launched the Anti-Gang and Firearms Investigation Task Force this week. The task force would feature officers from the the police force, obviously, the defense force, customs, immigration, inland revenue, and the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Officers from other agencies would be seconded to the task force for a period of 2 years, after which the task force would be evaluated. And to say this multiple agency initiative would tackle illegal weapons and gang violence in the Bahamas. In particular, the task force is geared towards tracing and identifying gun smugglers and firearms trafficking, with special attention to our ports and borders. Of course, our conversation with the commissioner earlier will have sort of advised our listeners that the flow of guns from the United States into the Bahamas remains a major concern. More than 90% of the guns confiscated can be traced back to gun shops in the US and other American manufacturers. Prime Minister Philip Davis said, as he addressed the ceremony, that a right to bear arms, which is a right enshrined in the United States Constitution, cannot include a definition of being a right to traffic. Davis has previously called on the U.S. to do more to stop the flow of firearms from the U.S. into the Bahamas. And he commended the U.S. for passing the Safer Communities Act, which is a bilateral piece of legislation aimed at increasing penalties for firearms traffickers. U.S. Charge d'Affaires Usher Pitts commended the police force for its work in combating the illegal flow of weapons and urged continued cooperation between the Bahamas and the U.S. On the sidelines of the event, Pitts told reporters that this is a Bahamian effort, and it always has been. And she said that the U.S. Embassy would support, and that support would come in a number of ways. One way is to have a professional U.S. law enforcement on the embassy staff, and also to provide training in terms of sending police and defense force officers to the U.S. and to El Salvador. The final piece, she said, is physical support in terms of tangible resources. She also highlighted the importance of the Safer Communities Act, which is passed, and it's still new legislation. So, of course, we'll have to see how it works out. But what Pitts said is that the U.S. is working on ways that Caribbean countries can work regionally to combat gun crime. And that would most likely be in the form of tracing guns and working with U.S. prosecutors through the judicial system to prosecute those who traffic in guns. Under the radar this week, we saw in the House the opening of debate on the Nurses and Midwives Bill of 2020, which would require an annual renewal of a license to practice nursing in the Bahamas, and would also require that nurses engage in continuing education. But we'll take a break here, and when we come back, we will come back with our special guest interview. And if we have time after the interview, then we'll go through the stories that are under the radar that we thought should have gotten a little more attention this week. And I hope that you stick around for that. We'll be right back here on the Political Review with your host, Quincy Parker. That's me. And we'll see you in a few minutes.
Global tensions close to the Caribbean. Join international experts, local professionals, and policymakers at the 9th Annual RF Economic Outlook. Be part of the conversation on March 14th by reserving your seat today at rfbeo.com. RFEO 2023 is proudly sponsored by RF Bank and Trust, Alive Doctors Hospital, Fidelity Bank, J.S. Johnson, PwC, and The Tribune.
Ready to step into the future? From your front door to the backyard and everywhere in between. See and speak to whoever's there with Ring Video doorbells and security cameras now available at Alive. Protect what matters most, all from one easy app, available in your Google or Apple Play Store. Visit bealive.com/ring to learn more. We are Alive.
Always on the go? Missed the show? You can now listen to Guardian Radio talk shows anytime, anywhere on Spotify and YouTube by searching Guardian Radio 96.9 FM or by entering the name of. You can also listen by logging on to GuardianTalkRadio.com and clicking on the podcast tab. Guardian Radio, continuing to provide you with fresh news and smart talk anywhere, anytime, all day.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Political Review with me, Quincy Parker. It is my pleasure to be your host on this, the 5th day of February, 2023. Lord, January finish. We're already on to the second month of 2023. And when you went to sleep yesterday, it was 2021. Child, please, this is a very, 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 if you don't believe in the Bible, I don't know how else you could explain how fast the time is flying. But anyway, it is what it is. So, this week, the Bahamas Insurers Association had a press conference where they laid out some issues that they have with a decision by the government. Now, the government has decided that it will disallow insurance to recoup the VAT on insurance premiums. What that means, and we'll get to the, I'll play something in just a minute so that you could hear, you can hear for yourself. But what that means is that the government has made a decision that we have that may have serious impacts on how Bahamians deal with the healthcare decisions that they may have to make. I'm being careful with my language because I don't want to overstate the impact or the potential impact of this. But I think it is crucial that, well, let me play this statement. This is Marcus Bosland from the Bahamas Insurers Association speaking at a press conference that the association held last week.
The BIR intends to stop insurance companies from being able to recover the VAT paid on health insurance claims. This will mean that in addition to paying VAT on net premiums, clients will now also be responsible for all of the VAT on the underlying medical services. The BIR has rationalized this change by arguing that the medical service received is between the health service provider and the insured. The BIR's new position takes no account of the fact that the purpose of health insurance is to pay insured's health expenses and instead treats them as two independent services. The BIA has argued that health insurance is a means of financing healthcare, and it is unreasonable and illogical to ignore the linkage between the two. As both health insurance and health services are taxable, health insurance claims should continue to be tax deductible for health insurance. Otherwise, the government would be knowingly applying two levels of VAT on health insurance. The government has rejected the proposition.
So, the choice by the government is to disallow companies to recover VAT on these premiums. What that means to you, the customer, is essentially that you are now responsible for the entirety of the VAT burden associated with your insurance policy. This is a significant change. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important about this change is that what it ultimately means, and the folks from the BIA, I think, would agree with this, is that people will now have to consider whether to access healthcare based on the new cost structure. That's major. Equally major, in my view, is that the consultation process adopted by the government is, well, to use the words of the insurance agents, the Insurance Association, at best incomplete, unquote. So the government has met with the BIA, but no consultation appears to have been conducted with the healthcare providers in the medical community. And there's certainly been no consultation with the public. So where's the notification of the change? Where's the explanation of the rationale? This new paradigm is expected to begin in April, and I can't wrap my mind around how so significant a change is being contemplated with virtually, certainly up to now, no public information, no public discussion, nothing. While government has said talks are ongoing on the issue, the fact is the implementation date of April has not been changed and will not be changed. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to table the rest of my comments for now, and I'm going to go ahead and welcome our guest, our special guest, the Shadow Minister of Finance, Parliament for Pine Ridge, the inimitable J. Quincy Thompson. Quincy, welcome back to the Political Review.
Thank you very much, Quincy. And I just have to make one quick correction there. Member of Parliament for East Grand Bahama.
I'm sorry, I said
I don't want my East Grand Bahama constituents getting nervous.
Yes,
I am still their member of Parliament. But I want to thank you for your invitation to be here. It is a pleasure. Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon, Bahamas, to all of your listeners. I hope that I could be of some assistance to you this afternoon.
Yes, yeah, sure. I apologize both to Pine Ridge, I believe that's, and to East Grand Bahama. Forgive me for my slip.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I'm not powerful enough to move you, and I doubt that you would. I doubt that you would move anyway.
No. I love the people of Pine Ridge. They gave me my first start, but I have now been claimed and fully entrenched, fully a part of the family of East Grand Bahama.
There you go. All right. So Mr. Thompson, I'll be honest with you. when I listened to this press conference, I thought I was in the twilight zone, and I'll tell you why. We are in a moment of development as a country where information is readily accessible and shareable in the most simple and far-reaching of manners, right? The idea of a change to the VAT structure that relates to insurance in particular,
yes,
is being contemplated, is something that you would imagine that the government would float that balloon early so that people could have their say. So that
yes,
when you come, even if you know your direction, even if you have no intention of deviating from your stated position, you can't essentially spring it on people a month before implementation and still be considered someone who cares about the public response or the public view, right? This is almost the definition of unilateral action.
Yeah, this is a huge problem, Quincy. This is not a small issue. This is an issue that's potential to affect hundreds of thousands of Bahamians and to make their medical bills a lot larger than they already are. And the difficult part about it is that it wasn't the government who brought this to the table of the public. This was the insurance companies
exactly
who brought this to the attention of the public. And when the government was confronted with the issue of, look, you have not talked to the medical community about this. You have not talked to the public, most importantly, you've not talked to the public about this. Their response was, and the financial secretary is quoted as saying, this does not rise to the level of a policy change, so there was no need to consult on this. That this is one issue between the inland revenue and one sector of the industry, which again really is mind-boggling that you would have and would act on an issue that would affect thousands, hundreds of thousands of Bahamians. In fact, it affects every single public service worker, and it affects thousands of other Bahamians, and you would not think to consult with them. You would not think to speak to the medical community that this most definitely affects. And I hope that the public sort of understands this issue and understands what this will mean if the government proceeds with it come April. That first of all, the government now is calling upon every insurance company to now pay an additional tax for business license fees. That's the first thing. And insurance companies have said, if you expect us to pay an additional amount for business license fees, this is an expense that is a new expense for us. And so we now, every premium that you pay to us, so that we can take that into account, which means that every premium now is going to increase. That's just the first one. And then the second one is that any insurance claim, and the insurance company was quite clear in their articulating sort of the proposition. Now, if I make a claim for medical insurance, the most that I pay now is the deductible. I may pay VAT on the deductible. That's all I pay The insurance will then cover the rest of the medical bill, and the insurance will cover the VAT on the rest of the medical bill. They, in turn, were able to claim this back. So, in essence, it was where they would pay it, but they would claim it back. So it's pretty much what they would call a write-off. Now, the government is saying you can't write off any longer. So the insurance company now is saying, well, hold on. If that's the case, then the customer has to pay the VAT, and the customer has to pay the VAT up front. So if the procedure was 50,000, then instead of just paying the deductible, which may be 2,000, I can handle that, I'll pay that. You now have to pay the deductible plus VAT on the entire procedure, which would have, in that case, would be 5,000 if the procedure is 50,000. So this is a significant increase in costs. Think about it, even if you, for medication, I claim from my insurance company, my medication. So every month I get my medication, I go to the pharmacy. The pharmacy says, okay, here's your couple dollars deductible. The rest, the insurance company will pay. My medication now will increase because I now have to pay the VAT on the additional amount for medication. So it is going to mean healthcare costs, private healthcare costs is going to significantly increase for hundreds of thousands of Bahamians. It is a big deal.
Why do you think that this action is being taken?
Well, clearly the government is trying to get every dollar it can. And the government says that they are trying to increase revenue without new taxes. Well, there is a very slight difference between a new tax and a new interpretation of the tax law, which allows me to extract more. And that is precisely what this is. Because the Inland Revenue interpreted the law differently than it did before. So that allowed the insurance companies to treat this as an input. Now, they have interpreted the law differently, which now means that you cannot. So I want to keep my VAT monies as opposed to treating it as an input. And so that is precisely why they want to do it. They want to collect every dollar, extract every dime that they can from the ordinary Bahamian, because that's who's paying it, and that's really the reason why they're doing it. The difficult part, they expect us to pay more. They expect us to sacrifice more without the government itself deciding to cut back or to make sacrifices itself. And that's what I, as well as many other Bahamians, have a huge problem with.
So here's my challenge, right? I get that you need money. And truly, I don't think anybody who's paying attention to the state of affairs of the public purse at this moment would argue that our government needs money.
Clearly, we do, because that's how we pay all of our government expenses. We raise revenue, and it is through taxes. It is through fees. That's how the government gets its money. The key though is one, and this takes us on also to the sort of the fiscal strategy, new fiscal strategy report that was just released, is that it does not provide us with any new revenue streams or any untapped potential revenue streams that we can look to gain additional revenue, or to make sure that the way that we tax is a bit more equitable. One of the things that we criticized this government for, and they have still not answered, was when they decreased stamp tax or VAT on $1 million properties. There was a change that the F&M government put in place, was that if you had a property that was valued over $2 million, you would pay, and we moved it, I believe, from 10 to 12. You would pay 12% VAT on properties that were $2 million. The PLP came in, they changed it, and they reduced VAT on those same $2 million properties from 12 to 10. And that really would amount to several $7 million worth of revenue that was lost. And that was a way of making these taxes a bit more equitable, because it meant those who had more would pay more. So the only persons who are dealing with $2 million worth or $2 million properties are people with means, people who are able to pay more. And so we had that policy, and it was unfortunate to change. But those are the kinds of decisions that we need to look at. Another decision that was made by this PLP government was they made yachts duty-free. Now, again, they may say, well, we want to have a yachting industry and so on and so on. But the reality of it is those persons who own $1 million yachts have the ability to pay the customs duty on those yachts. So if we are going to call upon the middle class and the poor to pay more, and we are extracting it from them, then we must also look at ways to make this more equitable and extract even more from those who have the means to pay more.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fiscal strategy report. I want to get to that, specifically to the $150 million BPL liability in a moment. But before we leave this issue with the VAT on insurance premium, it seems like the government had a calculus. Well, let's say it's a difficult job, right? Because either you penalize the VAT payer, the insured person, or you penalize the insurance company.
Yep.
In your grab for.
But remember now, you would know VAT is a consumer tax.
Yes.
So even if you attempt to extract it from, say, the insurance company is going to, at the end of the day, claim it back. So really, it is the customer, the ordinary person who is the consumer, the one who I would say is at the end of the track.
Yeah.
They're the ones who ultimately pay, because even if you pay the businesses the VAT, the businesses are able to claim. So it is really the consumer, the guy at the bottom, who pays that VAT expense. And so anytime we look at these kinds of decisions, we have to bear that in mind, and make sure that we are not doing things that are going to put too onerous a burden on that ordinary Bahamian who's at the bottom of that chain.
So two more questions on this then, right? In terms of, we agree that the Department of Inland Revenue has had a change of heart in terms of how they interpret this. I guess we just have to accept that a dire need for government revenue would have driven that change in interpretation.
So, I mean, my understanding is yes, and this is across the board, attract as much untapped VAT revenue that they can, and so which it means making different interpretations on the law. It means doing a number of other things, checks and balances, to sort of extract as much as they can. So on that side, I understand it, and I understand their need and the desire to have more revenue. I mean, I sat where they are, so I understand that point. That every day you as a government you must seek to ensure that you can obtain as much revenue as you possibly can, because you need it in order to do as much as you can in terms of expenses. But there's a balancing act. And we also need to see the corresponding savings. We also need the corresponding discipline. We also need to see the corresponding cuts. It is difficult, a Bahamian, that I need this revenue. I have to have this revenue. And on the other side, you are not prepared to cut your travel. You are not prepared to cut the delegation on your travel. You are not prepared to cut the amount of people who travel first class. Those are the things that create problems for Bahamians. See, I get that we need more money, but if we need so much money, why are you not sacrificing as well? And I think that's the question that a lot of Bahamians are having.
Yeah, you actually answered a question that I just got on WhatsApp, or you started to answer it. And it's a natural question, right? The question is, so what are the sacrifices that the government should make themselves, seeing that this insurance step is not a new stream of revenue? And I mean, the few that you listed just now, I mean, to me, that's low-hanging fruit.
I mean, we've called upon them, right? Right now, the government in this new budget, 2022-2023 budget, increased their spending on travel. I believe the figure was about $4 million. But not only did they increase the spending on travel, but they blew the budget last year, blew the travel budget last year as well. And that again is a sign of being undisciplined. It's a sign of extravagance. Do we need every occasion to have an event? Does every event have to be as extravagant as it is? Do we need a $10 million budget for the independence and all of the ceremonies and everything that is there? Are we going to celebrate? Absolutely. Should we be proud? Yes, absolutely. But again, those are the kinds of decisions that we should be looking at. Because those are what they call discretionary spending. You don't have to do it. So those are discretionary spending. You are locked in on certain expenses. You're locked in on what you have to pay for your loans. You're locked in on what you have to pay for your light bill. You're locked in terms of what you have to pay for your wages. But there are certain discretionary spending that you are able to adjust, and unfortunately, the government is just not doing so. And when you are as aggressive as the government is being with collecting VAT, you have to be just as aggressive in your spending cuts.
Yeah. See, that's the issue, right? Is that we have this sense that that they're not they are asking for us to make hard choices that they, as a government, aren't seeming to make. And I'm trying very hard to be. I don't want to be. This isn't about. Blasting anybody. I'm just trying to look at it as clearly as possible. And I don't see how this kind of a decision accords with the rhetoric from the government. It doesn't seem to work.
And one thing that also needs to happen is the government, if that is the government's position, then it should be upfront and say, this is our position. We coming after you for more VAT. We're coming after you for more real property tax. We are coming after you for more fees. But obviously, the government doesn't want to say that. But when you look at the fiscal strategy report, that's exactly what this government is saying. Because they say there are no new taxes. However, we are going to extract an additional $1.2 billion in VAT payments, real property tax payments, customs payments, and fees. Well, who's going to pay that? The ordinary taxpayer. So that is another issue that we are having is we must also be proactive in tax reform. It is a difficult question. It is a hard question. It's a topic that nobody wants to talk about. It's a topic that nobody wants to address. But the only way that we are going to get to a more equitable tax system is for us to start that dialogue with the public. And we do not, unfortunately, see they are just making these ad hoc decisions. But to start a dialogue with the public, to put in place a white paper, to present that white paper to the public, and to start the dialogue to get the feedback from the public on a more equitable tax reform. And so, those are the big governing tough issues that the government has been burying their head in the sand. National insurance is another one. They're burying their heads in the sand. But it is a difficult but most critical issue that has to be tackled. And as a government, we cannot run from the difficult decisions. We cannot run from the unpopular decisions. That's what it means to govern. You govern in with the good things. So with every press conference where you are agreeing to do that, and you want to have feel good moments, you have to have the same kind of press conferences when you are increasing the cost of medication, when you are increasing the cost of medical services. And bear in mind that the government could deal with this issue very quickly. The government can deal with this issue very quickly by just cutting VAT on medical services. If they cut VAT off of medical services, it would resolve this issue. And it will bring relief to those hundreds of thousands of people that when it comes to medical services, life and death situations, it would bring relief to those persons where, I don't have to think about, or I don't have to fret that I'm going to have this additional cost. And if I have this additional cost, whether or not I'm going to be able to make this procedure or do this procedure. So that's again a critical situation.
You are the party's spokesman on matters financial and such. So I'm going to ask you a hard question now.
Sure.
Will the FNM reverse this position? Can you say that?
I cannot, and I will not go on record without first consulting with colleagues because it's not just my decision in terms of what the F&M will and will not do. Is it something that Quincy Thompson would push for? I believe that Quincy Thompson would absolutely push for the removal of VAT of medical services. And I believe that the F&M has called for the government to remove VAT off of medical services. I believe in a recent release by the leader, Michael Pintard, has put on the record that the F&M is calling for the removal of VAT off of medical services. The same way that we've been calling for the removal of VAT off of breadbasket items and the removal of VAT off of medication, because that was our previous position.
Okay. I'll give you that, but it's time now, I think, 2023, for us to start getting a sense of what a Pintard administration, all things remaining equal and the way they are, would look like. And I think this is an issue that is, to me, a fairly simple choice. Because, I don't think this is a difficult decision.
No, and that's why I said I think the solution to this is that you remove VAT. Other countries have done it. Barbados has done it, where you remove VAT off of medical services. And the government is not losing, in particular on this issue, the government is not losing revenue on this because they never had it to begin with because of the way that the law was interpreted. Those persons who were the only revenue that would be lost if you did that would be those persons who pay themselves without having an insurance, that they pay themselves, pay for a private medical service, and then they pay VAT on that medical service. But again, I believe that revenue could be dealt with if you just increase the VAT on the $2 million properties, then those would cancel each other out.
Yeah. All right. The next thing I wanted to get to, and I see we running low on time. So the fiscal strategy report revealed this week that Bahamians have been hit with a $150 million bill due to what some folks are calling the mishandling of the BPL fuel hedging strategy.
Yes.
That cost was branded a significant unbudgeted liability for the government in the fiscal strategy report. But that money has to be paid off to prevent the electricity supplies from being interrupted. So, it sounds like, language and words, but what's real
that's a real dollar amount and real money that has to be paid. And that's a real dollar amount that has to be paid by the taxpayer.
Yeah. And this is sorry. Go
ahead.
Yeah, to ensure continued provision of essential electrical services to the public, the government has committed to ensuring payment of this liability by the corporation. That's a quote from the report, right?
Yeah.
What that quote is saying, or what the government is suggesting, and I'm going to make a statement here, and then I'll ask you to comment on it, is that Bahamians households and businesses, either as taxpayers or consumers, are going to have to pay that $150 million bill.
Absolutely. I mean, the answer is, and it is an amount that we didn't have to pay. It is an amount that we now have to pay as a result of the inaction, mistake, wrong decision, bad decision, whatever you want to call it, of the government. That this was an amount that, had the government acted when they ought to have acted, had they acted on the recommendations, had they acted on the expert advice, then we would not be in the position that we are in, having to pay this $150 million or over $100 million debt. And again, the F&M has been tirelessly dealing with this issue and tirelessly addressing this and pushing and pushing and pushing. And it has only been through the pushing of the F&M that we see facts now starting to come out. And we now see where once the Minister of Works denied having any recommendations, denied having received any recommendations, now remembers that he did in fact receive recommendations. But it was not him who made the decision. It was the Ministry of Finance that made the decision. But the Prime Minister says that he didn't have anything to do with it. It was not him who made the decision. Possibly it might have been the Financial Secretary. So who is taking responsibility for this? And it again cannot be swept under the rug, because it is an expense pay. It is an expense that has caused our electricity bills to increase, and someone must be held accountable for it.
In the commentary over what was said and what was not said in the House, something you said just now. The fact is that the Prime Minister said in the House that he had seen nothing in relation to any requests for hedge trades. And then he insisted that this is still the Prime Minister, that he had no part in the decision to reject the trade recommendation.
Yep.
This is after Sears has said on his feet in the House that the paper on hedging was addressed to the Minister of Finance, which is the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And the
Absolutely.
Minister of Finance had decided to reject the recommendation after reviewing it.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't understand how the Prime Minister can say he had no part in the decision to reject the trade recommendation when cabinet paper was addressed directly to him in his capacity as the Minister of Finance. And only in his capacity as the Minister of Finance could the trade.
Quincy, we don't have to guess and speculate a ministry as to who is responsible. There is what they call a convention, that which means there's a practice that the minister has ultimate responsibility. So if something goes wrong in that ministry, the minister has ultimate responsibility. So the Prime Minister is the Minister of Finance. If there was a wrong decision in the Ministry of Finance, the ultimate person that's responsible is the Minister of Finance. The same when it comes to the Ministry of Works. If the something goes wrong, ultimately it is the Minister of Works who is responsible. And we have a challenge where the Minister of Works said on his feet in Parliament certain comments. And it cannot be right that we just treat it as business when a minister of the government makes a statement on his feet in the House of Assembly which is different from just making a statement to the press or making a statement outside of the House. But when you make that statement in the House of Assembly, on your feet, that statement carries consequences.
But the member for Fort Charlotte, the Minister for Public Works, Alfred Sears, has said, and he said this week, that at no time did he deliberately, consciously mislead the House.
It does not matter whether you do it deliberately or not. Misleading does not have to be an issue of intentionally misleading. If you mislead, then there are consequences for it, which means standing up in Parliament, admitting to what you've done, and then taking the consequences for it. Unfortunately, we have not seen that.
Yeah. Because it seems to me, and I, just by reading it looks like the Prime Minister is throwing Alfred Sears under the bus.
Well, it's difficult because at first it seemed as though the Minister for Works, Alfred Sears, was throwing the Prime Minister under the bus. When he was saying it wasn't me who made the decision not to proceed with the trades, but it was the Ministry of Finance who made that decision.
But he did come back to the House to establish his own integrity by saying, I made a statement that was wrong. Brave Davis has made no such statement.
It again is not sufficient for you to say you made a statement that was wrong. There are consequences that are making a statement in the House of Assembly that
you say that
to have known. You ought to have known.
Yeah.
See, it's before you make a statement that says, I was not told, I was not given. It is your responsibility to ensure that you were not told and to ensure that you were not given before you make that statement. If you notice, in the House of Assembly, when people speak on their feet, they are very, very careful of the words they make. Because you can't be flippant when you make those statements on your feet in the House of Assembly.
No, you can't be. And I listen, I've been a reporter for 30 plus years. I have seen I come back to bite you in the butt enough times that I know there's always, at the very least, an internal consequence for it. If you are put in the position that Mr. Sears has been put in, or has himself.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that the FNM's continued attempt to force his resignation is it's almost a distraction from the larger question of the government costing the Bahamian people $150 million extra.
Yeah. I mean, I take your point on that. And while I think both are important and both need to be fully pressed and fully articulated and should not be, one should not be sort of left off the hook but it is, you are right, additional focus ought to still be made because we are still, the public is still being forced to pay more in electricity bills.
Yeah.
And the public is going to have to foot this bill. So that I agree that cannot be swept aside and you can't lose focus on that point because that's a significant point for the public.
I mean,
and it is decisions like that. It is decisions that is costing us for electricity. That is a problem. It is decisions like the VAT on the medical claim that is costing us to have to pay more for our medical bills. It is decisions like VAT on bread basket items that is costing us to have to pay more for bread basket items. It is decisions about VAT on medication that is costing us to have to pay more for medication. The customs brokers recently were up in arms about additional costs that were being placed on them by the Ministry of Finance. And if those additional costs are being placed on them, those costs are now going to be carried over to the consumer, which means there is an additional cost on importing goods into the country that is now going to be placed on the backs of the consumer and backs of Bahamians. So it is unfortunate that a string of bad decisions that the government is making these are not just bad decisions, but these are decisions that are costing the public more money and costing the public to pay more money when they can solely afford to do so.
Yeah, and what I find, so you also have this challenge, in my view, right? You have I read the Minister of Health's remarks with great interest when he was saying that the government is seeking funding for a new hospital in New Providence, right?
Yeah, I could only chuckle because of the again bad decision that the government has made. You know, it is amazing that when we left office, the funds there was an $86 million loan already received, meaning money in the bank already received. There was a contract already signed by the Beck Group, who was in the process of designing either 5-story or whatever story tower that was going to be similar to the critical care block. In process, one only needed to see that process through, and we would have been well on our way to having a new facility that would have, there was a new ICU, new male ward, new female ward, some other additional services that this tower was going to create. But the government decided that they would cancel that tower, they would cancel the loan and give back the money. And now we're in a position where there is an admitted crisis at PMH, and they are seeking funding. It is another bad decision that is costing the Bahamian public.
How much do you think it hurt Mike Darville to say we looking for funding after the Prime Minister had touted all the money they were going to get from the digital assets, like what FTX was supposed to represent?
Well, I think the Prime Minister didn't necessarily tout what was going to get from digital assets. I think he was touting also about these carbon credits.
Yeah.
And the digital exchange about carbon credits. But again, while the carbon credits is a novel idea, I believe, are years away from seeing any revenue, possible revenue from this. And so it is something that is new, something that may possibly generate some revenue many years. We need revenue now, and we have problems to solve now. And again, had the government just seen through, just proceeded with what was already in process and not stopped the new tower, we really would have been in a much better position. We would have been in a position where our nurses and our doctors would have been seeing the 6-story or 5-story tower going up. They would have been able to see where our future is, see where we're going to be moving to, and the morale of nurses and doctors would have been different, would have been more improved. And again, it is a series of bad decisions that this government has done, which have consequences. And the persons who are bearing the brunt of those consequences is the Bahamian public.
I think that's going to do it for us today. J. Quincy Thompson, Member of Parliament for East, and Shadow Minister for Finance. Thank you very much for your time and energy here on the Political Review. We really appreciate your presence with us today.
Quincy, thank you very much again. I hope I was helpful, and I appreciate your show. You're doing an excellent job. Please keep up the good work, and a pleasant good evening to your guests and to your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother. Take care.
Take care. All right.
And folks, that's going to do it for us this week, the 5th of February, 2023. Time is passing. Make sure that you are spending your time wisely and doing those things which are for the benefit of you and your family, because I tell you what, boy, it's a rough world out there. You got to look out for yours, and you got to let them look out for you. And it's really a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk a little bit about the nurses bill, and I'm going to try and get either the Minister of Immigration or the Minister of Health to join me to talk about these very important matters. Until then, God bless you, and we'll see you next week. Brittany, great job. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.